You don't apply for this world. You survive long enough to be chosen for it. And the moment that call comes, the one that changes everything, you won't feel excitement. You'll feel wait. Level 1. The candidate. You are 23 years old and standing in a gymnasium that smells like rubber and cold sweat. Your file is sitting on a desk somewhere, in a building you've never been inside. You don't know what's in it. You don't need to. What matters is what happens in the next 72 hours. The assessment officer looks through you, not at you. His eyes are measuring something invisible: your pain threshold, your decision-making under oxygen debt, whether the person you are under pressure is someone worth investing a decade into. You've been told almost nothing about what this process involves. That's intentional. JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, doesn't recruit, it selects. And selection is designed to make you quit before the hard part even starts. The irony is that this gymnasium, this cold floor, these fluorescent lights, this is the easy part. You won't know that until much later. Right now, all you know is that you want this more than you've ever wanted anything, and that wanting it might be the least relevant thing about you. The board will decide, not you. And that is already your first lesson in the world you're trying to enter. Level 2. The team leader. Your team has 12 men, and you are responsible for all of them. That sounds simple until the first time you brief a target package at 0200 and realize there are 47 variables your planning didn't account for. You are a junior officer with a rank that suggests authority and an experience gap that suggests something else entirely. Your senior NCO, a man who has done this for 16 years, watches you brief without blinking. Not because he's impressed, because he's calculating how much of your plan he'll need to quietly fix before the birds lift. You learn fast or you don't last. The missions at this level are direct action. You are a precision instrument being pointed at a problem. High-value targets, hostage rescue, sensitive site exploitation in places that don't officially exist. You go in fast and you come out faster. And somewhere between the infill and the exfil, in the space of a few violent minutes, you understand something that no academy ever taught you. Plans end at first contact. What carries you through is judgment built from repetition, and you haven't had enough repetitions yet. That gap between your confidence and your competence is the most dangerous terrain you will ever cross. You cross it anyway, because that's what this level requires. And you don't realize yet that every level above you is just a larger version of this same gap with higher stakes and fewer people to blame. Level 3. The troop commander. Now, you are leading multiple teams, 20 to 40 operators depending on the mission set, and the complexity has multiplied in ways that math alone can't describe. You are no longer the person executing the plan. You are the person responsible for the plan being executable at all. There is a difference. At the team level, you lived inside the problem. At the troop level, you have to see the problem from outside it and above it simultaneously. Your radio crackles constantly. The intelligence is always incomplete. The timeline is always compressed. And the second team, the one running parallel to your primary element, just made contact with something that wasn't on the target overlay. You have to decide in the next 40 seconds whether to redirect your primary effort, hold position, or call the mission. 40 seconds, with incomplete information, inside a building with no windows, in a country that will deny your presence if this goes wrong. The decision you make right now will be reviewed in a classified after-action report by people with more information than you had. That is the weight of this level. You learn to make decisions you can defend, not decisions you're certain about, because certainty is a luxury that doesn't exist in this world. And the most unsettling part? You're getting good at it, comfortable even, which means they are about to give you something harder. Level 4. The Squadron Commander. You are a lieutenant colonel, and you are running a full operational squadron inside one of JSOC's Tier 1 units. This is the level that breaks careers or builds legacies. Everything above you is watching. Everything below you is depending on you. Your squadron is a self-contained organism. Operators, enablers, intelligence analysts, logisticians, aviation assets, signals personnel. You are not just commanding fighters. You are orchestrating a system. The operational tempo at this level is relentless in a way that civilian language has no word for. You might be running simultaneous operations across 3 different countries under 3 different legal authorities, each with its own rules of engagement, each with its own political sensitivity, each with its own chain of command, wanting answers at different hours of the day. You stop sleeping in the conventional sense. You start sleeping in intervals, like a machine that needs maintenance rather than rest. The operators who report to you are the best in the world at what they do. That is not comfort, it is pressure. Because the best in the world expect to be led by someone better. And some mornings, before the day brief starts, you sit in the dim light of the command element and you ask yourself quietly whether you are actually that person. The answer has to be yes. Not because you believe it completely, but because doubt at this level is a contagion and you cannot afford to be its source. There is something waiting at the next level that will redefine everything you think command means. You don't know it yet, but it's already been set in motion. Level 5, the Task Force Commander. You are a colonel, and you are now commanding a Joint Special Operations Task Force in a named theater of war. This is where the nature of the job transforms in a way that cannot be fully explained to anyone who hasn't stood here. Below you are Tier 1 units, Tier 2 units, interagency partners, foreign military elements, intelligence assets, and support networks that span continents. Above you is a chain of command that includes geographic combatant commanders, the Secretary of Defense, and sometimes a phone call from the National Security Council at a time no phone call should arrive. The tactical brilliance that carried you to this position is now almost irrelevant. What matters here is something different: strategic intuition, political awareness, the ability to translate military action into policy outcomes while simultaneously ensuring your operators on the ground are protected by every resource you can generate. You are no longer in the fight. You are the fight's architect. And architects are judged not by the beauty of their drawings, but by whether the building stands. You have decision authority over operations that will never be made public. Operations that could trigger diplomatic consequences across multiple governments if they go wrong. You brief congressional staffers with security clearances and watch them write notes they barely understand. You brief heads of state through interpreters who soften the language of what you're actually describing. And late at night, in the mission support site that serves as your command post, you read the names of the men and women who were injured or killed under your authority. You read them slowly, every one, not as a ritual, as a reckoning. This level carries a weight that doesn't leave when the deployment ends. It follows you home. It sits across from you at dinner. It doesn't ask for anything. It just reminds you of what it cost. And somewhere in a building in Northern Virginia, someone has already decided your next assignment. An assignment that you will not choose. An assignment that will ask more of you than any of this already has. Level 6, the JSOC Commander. You are a 3-star general, and you now command the Joint Special Operations Command itself. Fort Bragg has a building. Inside that building is a command that officially doesn't explain itself to the public. You are the person who explains it to everyone else. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, the President. You have commanded operators in the field. You have run task forces in war. And now you are running the entire architecture. The command structure under you includes Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the 75th Ranger Regiment, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and a collection of supporting elements so compartmented that even you had to be read into them gradually over your first 60 days in command. The intelligence you receive each morning would paralyze most people. You read it before 0500, alone, in a secure facility, and then you walk into a room full of the most capable staff officers in the world, and you give direction. Not requests, direction. The operations, running under your authority on any given day, span nearly every inhabited continent. Counter-terrorism, counter-proliferation, hostage recovery, direct action against networks that have spent years trying to find a way to kill you personally. Your face is not publicly known. Your schedule is not publicly published. You move through airports like a civilian because the alternative creates a signature. You've been doing this so long that the absence of recognition feels normal. What doesn't feel normal is the full scope of what lands on your desk. Because at this level, the line between military action and national security policy is not a line at all. It is a negotiated space, redefined daily, where your judgment carries legal, political, and human consequences simultaneously. There is no manual for this. There are precedents. There are legal frameworks. There are relationships built over decades with intelligence directors and foreign partners who trust you because you have earned it across every level below this one. But the decisions are yours, and the decisions are irreversible. A mission that goes wrong at this level doesn't just end careers. It reshapes alliances. It creates diplomatic crises. It can ignite or extinguish conflicts that millions of people will live or die inside of. You know this every single morning, and you act anyway. Because the alternative inaction, caution disguised as wisdom, hesitation dressed as prudence, costs its own kind of lives. You learned that lesson at level 2, Standing in front of 12 men in the dark, you have never forgotten it. Level 7. After command, the orders come quietly. The way everything in this world comes without ceremony, without announcement. Your time in command is complete. Your successor has been identified. The transition is professional and precise, because that's what this command demands, even in its endings. You sit for the last time in the commander's chair, in that classified building, and you look at the room that has been your world for the past 2 to 3 years. The maps on the walls. The screens cycling through feeds from places most people have never heard of. The staff who have worked alongside you through operations that will remain classified for decades. You don't give a speech. You give a brief handshake, a few quiet words, and you walk out. Because that's the culture. Ego is a liability in this world, and it doesn't get to make your exit dramatic. What you carry out of that building is not a trophy. It is something harder to define. The accumulated weight of every decision made under your authority. The names of the fallen. The knowledge of operations that succeeded in ways that can never be acknowledged publicly and failed in ways that haunt privately. You will go on to another role, an advisory position, a combatant command, a policy role in Washington. Or you will retire into a life where people at dinner parties ask what you did in the military and you give them an answer that contains nothing. And here is what they don't understand. What you couldn't have understood at 23 years old standing in that gymnasium. It was never about the rank. The rank was just the mechanism by which the world decided how much of itself to show you. Every level was a door. And every door opened onto something heavier, more real, and more permanent than the level before it. The people who lasted weren't necessarily the strongest or the most talented. They were the ones who could carry the weight of consequence without letting it collapse them, who could make irreversible decisions with incomplete information and then live with those decisions at full volume. That is the real progression of this world. Not the stars on the collar, not the classified compartments, not the authority over the most lethal units ever assembled. It is the slow accumulation of consequence carried in silence by people most of the world will never know existed. You put on civilian clothes. You walk through an airport like anyone else. And somewhere behind you, the command continues. It always continues. Because the world that made it necessary has not changed. And somewhere, right now, there is a 23-year-old standing in a cold gymnasium, being looked through by an officer who is measuring something invisible. And the whole thing begins again.